Hello everyone and welcome back to another exciting episode of Experience Kills. I am here with my partner in crime, Richard.
Good afternoon, or evening, or morning, or whenever you're listening.
And I'm your host, Ben. So let's talk about Omensight, specifically on Xbox, because I just got a code for this, but I found out that it's already been out for like a year and change on PlayStation 4, PC, and about 6 months on Nintendo Switch. I had no idea that the fine folks at Spearhead Games put this out so long ago, because I really liked the previous game they made, and I actually reviewed that on PS4, which was Stories Path to Destinies, which was this, again, really nice art style, really good character design, and just a really fun sort of action, mostly action, a little bit of RPG in there as well, which also had some interesting kind of ways with playing with the narrative, which we'll get into shortly about Omensight as well. But Richard, you've looked into this game a little bit now in preparation for this in-depth review discussion, and you were drawn to the art style as well, weren't you?
I've had a bit of a peek at it, and my first thought is, wow, that looks a lot like Breath of the Wild. It's got that fluid, cel-shaded, bright colour loveliness to it. Looks very alluring.
Yeah, it's sumptuous, isn't it? It's got that almost like really well made Saturday morning cartoon feel to it.
Yeah.
That just makes you feel young. Those sort of well drawn, anthropomorphized animals that have lots of character. There's a bit of Disney and Pixar about it, isn't there?
But without being too bright and cutesy. It's got edge to it.
Yeah, it does indeed. So Omensight, right, this is the concept of Omensight because it's quite unique. You play as the Harbinger, which is a somewhat, how should we say, cliched name for a character, but that's okay. And you drop into this world right upon its cataclysm, right upon its Armageddon, its end of days. And then you kind of travel back in time through various powers to sort of live through the final hours leading up to the cataclysm to try and discover what's caused it and how to prevent it, because you're this sort of avatar of existence and you want to try and prevent Ragnarok in this case, and you do this through sort of pursuing these various sort of narrative strands that are focused around the major characters of the game, which you will discover more of them as well as you play through these different strands. So it's actually at its core this sort of murder mystery, because the Ragnarok has kind of been brought about by the death of this particular type of priestess. So you're trying to find out why this character's died and how you can prevent this character's death by playing through these different storylines. So that's kind of like this inherent replayability aspect to the game. And the game itself is a fairly standard sort of action game, melee combat with a little bit of range in there. You feel pretty badass, you can juggle enemies, and then, there's some unlockable systems in here as well where you can get new powers and new abilities as you play through the different story strands, and all the while trying to piece together this overarching mystery and this overarching sort of narrative that combines through these very different type of character archetypes. You've got this like the big warrior bear character, and then you've got the wily kind of cat character, and then there's the mouse and the lizards, and they've all got... Just
to say that the bear is so cool. He's like a giant teddy bear.
Yeah. He's this kind of, but he's also really gruff and pretty myopic when you speak to him, and like miserable, and he's basically the last bastion of resistance against the evil sort of lizard emperor that's taken over the world. And there's a big kind of really sort of grandiose, fantastical plot that holds the whole game together. But what's really interesting in the gameplay beyond the kind of the melee combat, which is fine, it's not particularly standout, it works well enough, but beyond that, it's definitely this murder mystery thing where you're piecing together what's happened. And as you go through the game and unlocking various abilities and finishing off these various storylines, you're able to open up new paths through the levels, which you replay repeatedly as different characters, and also, of course, go back through with the ones you already have, and then, get different narrative snippets from those experiences as well. So yeah, it's really interesting and curious, really different. I like that.
So is it pretty much a linear experience? You're investigating these different strands, but do they all sort of follow the same path?
It's hard to describe. It's linear and it isn't, because it's definitely not sort of open world, and it's definitely not. There is a sort of a hub nature to it, because you will pick the different strands you want to go out to from this like little base you have, sort of beyond time and space, which you can then do your upgrades and stuff. But yeah, the narratives do change because of the replays that you put through them. I don't want to kind of say too much, because it's definitely the unique element of the game is how you replay these. There's only sort of like 5 or 6 distinct locations, but depending on the characters you go through the locations with and the amount of times you do it, the ways you'll approach them and the things you'll see and do are different, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So how relevant is the story? How prominent is that? Because it looks as if they've got some notable voice talent in there. They've got to be honest, I don't know the names, but some of the titles that these people are in are notable. So there's Patricia Somerset from Breath of the Wild. So it hasn't just got the graphics of Zelda; it's got some of the voice talent as well. It's got people from We Happy Few. So these are games that have not a massive vocal presence, but they're serious titles. So does this follow that sort of line where it's minimal sort of narrative, but it's got enough weight to it to be meaningful?
I'd say the narrative is quite at the forefront, to be honest. I mean, the combat is something you'll spend a fair bit of time with, but a lot of it is you kind of just hanging out with these characters as you go through that timeline with them, and getting to know more and more about them. I mean, there are characters on all the sides of the conflict. So there's probably, I'd describe it as sort of 3 sides of the conflict that has resulted in the end of days. You kind of have the resistance, you have the Imperials, and you kind of then have the extreme resistance, I guess, the really kind of hardcore ones that are going maybe too far to try and defeat the Empire, as it were. And you get to know these characters, and they really sort of develop with the playthroughs that you experience them with, and I think that's fun. And they're very well written, and they're like you said, you mentioned it, they're very well voice acted as well, and they've got a lot of charm to them, and they've got depth to them and nuance. Nobody is a black and white villain. Nobody is necessarily a hero, like a straight up good guy. Sometimes the heroic characters, what they see as the bad guys and their desire to defeat them kind of blinds them to the truth of situations. So yeah, nobody's necessarily obviously anything in this game, so it definitely encourages you to replay and to keep going and to uncover the truth of what happened in this murder mystery.
And is that compelling enough? Because we've seen titles that they're not the same sort of game, but the first thing that comes to mind is Tacoma, where you know the outcome, and your job is really to find the different strands of the story and combine them and work out how the end result occurred, what the interactions were along the way. But Tacoma's problem was that those interactions weren't all that interesting, really.
I think that's really important to mention, is that the interaction here, the gameplay, the minute-to-minute gameplay of the third-person action game with quite, while not necessarily the most unique style of melee combat, it's engaging enough. You've got to do platforming, you've got to do some like jumping around, you've got to do a little bit of light puzzle solving. When you're going through the worlds, there's definitely like chests that are a bit out of the way, and it's like, how am I going to get there? What have I got to keep doing until I can unlock the ability to get to that? So there's almost like a Metroidvania element to the replayability, because it's, instead of it being I need to keep going until I find the ability to unlock that, it's more like I need to keep going until I unlock a story beat that means I can go through this particular avenue in this particular location to get that chest. So there is definitely enough gameplay here to make you want to keep replaying it, and it's a unique enough concept and setting that kept me interested. At the end of the day, Tacoma, what got me through that, for example, was the story, and I wanted to see what would happen, and then also the pedigree of the studio. But as I've discussed in the past, I'm not the biggest fan of that game. I found it too dry and its presentation too austere. But this game is, like you mentioned, the visuals and the voice acting, and there is a sumptuousness to it that makes you want to dive into it. I really enjoyed it.
It looks like a place you want to explore. So
yeah, it totally is.
If that's complemented by interesting characters and story arcs within it, then it sounds like it's an interesting prospect. Even if it is late to market on Xbox, but I guess Xbox is the best place to have it, right?
Sure. I mean, I think this is a game that's going to play just about as well on any hardware, including the Switch. It'd be nice to have a go on with it on the go, actually. It'd be quite, I imagine it'd be a nice game to play in handheld, because the nature of the vignettes is that they're quite short, so they're quite bite-sized. So when you're doing these playthroughs of these different characters, the different time strands, they don't necessarily last for ages. So I think in handheld mode, it would also be really good. But Xbox, it looks great. It's up on the big screen as well, so the art style really lends itself to that big high resolution display. But I will say, I think Omensight by Spearhead Games is definitely worth checking out. It's an action game with some sort of third person platforming elements, which is really unique with the way it tells its narrative, and I think that wrapped with this murder mystery makes it a really cool game, really kind of fun experience. So unless you've got any other questions, Richard, I think that's the end of our little review discussion on Omensight.
Cool. I look forward to trying it out sometime.
See, have I convinced you to buy another game?
I don't know if I'm going to buy it. I'm so
Wait for it on Game Pass.
That's it. Wait for the Game Pass version to come out. But yeah, it does look interesting. I do want to give it a go. So thank you.
Yeah, not a problem. So that's been another episode of Experience Kills. I've been your host, Ben. You can find me at DIYE on Twitter. Where can they find you, Richard?
I'm at Colonel Red on Twitter.
Fantastic. And you can obviously find Experience Kills at Experience Kills on Twitter. And as I always like to mention, if you don't have the time to sit and watch these videos, they are also available on demand via audio from Spotify, iTunes, wherever you like to find a podcast, really. A like and subscribe would also always be appreciated on the video, but we'll be back soon with much more games discussion. There's always more coming, even in these summer months. So with that, I will say goodbye.
Goodbye.